Hello, in this lecture we're going to continue on Economics and Economic Reasoning Chapter 1. Remember that our goals are define economics, which we have done, discuss ways in which economics use economic reasoning, explain real-world events in terms of economic forces, social forces, and political forces. So remember, we're talking about economics as a social science, economics, social and political forces. So economic forces are mechanisms that ration scarce goods. So remember, our idea here is that we have a scarce amount of goods, and meaning that we have more desire than we have goods to distribute, and that is going to be a problem. And that means that there's going to have to be something that limits the distribution, something that will drive how the distribution will work. So economic forces are mechanisms that ration the scarce goods. A market force is an economic force that is given relatively free rein by society to work through the market. So when we think about a market force, now we're thinking about questions in terms of who is going to be deciding, making the decisions as to what should be produced, how much should be produced, and who should it be produced for, who gets to consume it. When we think about the question, the economic question of who is going to decide that? How will that be decided? How will those things be decided? Well, one is that we can try to use market forces, meaning that there's no individual, there's no committee involved in that. We're going to try to use the market forces, which we'll discuss more as we go. So then we have the invisible hand is the price mechanism that guides our actions in a market. The invisible hand is an example of a market force. So when we think about a market force, what we're thinking about is a market force as opposed to an individual or a committee making these types of decisions, those types of decisions being what to produce, how much to produce, how do we distribute, who gets to consume the things. We can think about doing that in terms of a market force being the invisible hand, some type of mechanism in which that mechanism, the invisible hand being the mechanism, will drive those questions. So for example, how would that work? Well, in a market, as we'll discuss, if there's going to be a shortage, meaning that we have far fewer goods than the demand is out there, what's going to happen in terms of a invisible hand or a market mechanism is the prices are going to rise. That'll naturally happen within the free market, within the visible hand. And what happens when prices rise? The demand for it will go down. People will want it more, want it less, and that should even things out. If there's a surplus, then if we happen to have more of a particular good than is desired for whatever reason, then what's going to happen is, well, prices are going to fall. And if prices fall, then people are going to demand more. That's how we typically think that people will react to prices rising and falling. And there could be exceptions. There will be exceptions to the rule. We can discuss those as we go. But that's basically a market force that's going to self-regulate within a market. So economic, social, and political forces. So look at what happens in society. What happens in society can be seen as a reaction to and interaction of the economic forces, the social forces, and the political forces. So social and political forces influence market forces, and social and political forces often work together against the invisible hand. So note that there's going to be conflicts oftentimes between social forces and individual forces, individual needs and wants, and then what we think about in terms of the entire market oftentimes. So we have different goals and objectives, and sometimes they can work at cross purposes to each other. So for example, if we're thinking about an individual firm, what does an individual firm want? They want profits. They want to dominate a market. They clearly do not want competition. They want no competition. They want to be the only person in the sector. That's the goal. They want to win. That's going to be the goal of basically an individual firm. If they can get political power, if they can get a group and have social influence, then they will. They're probably gonna try to do that. Well, at least they have incentive to try to do that in those terms. If we think about the market as a whole, the entire market, what are the goals that we would think about in terms of a market as a whole? Well, the market as a whole, we want to be probably as efficient as possible. We want to make as much goods as possible at the lowest prices. We want them to be as available to as many people as possible, which means that we probably, in terms of a market force, we do not want a monopoly. We want competition, because that usually drives down prices. That usually makes the production more efficient. So we have that kind of problem between individual goals and whatnot, between companies and individuals. And if we think about the goals of the economy as a whole, and they can work at cross purposes. Note that when we think about the invisible hand, individuals in and of themselves very much may not have an incentive to promote the invisible hand overall. They want to get a larger share of the market in some cases. Also note that when we think about the free market and think about market mechanisms, they're not always smooth, and we have some types where we may have a recession, and these types of things could happen politically, and if there could be a lot of political pressure in order to jump into the market and say, well, someone needs to do something about a recession. There's a real question as to what can be done, and should there be something to be done? Should we step into the market mechanism? When should we step into the market mechanism? If we step into the market mechanism, will it cause more problems down the line? Are we just going to extend the problems or deepen the recession in the long run? Or are there things that we can do that are helpful to it? And so those are going to be real questions, and there have been real questions ongoing throughout the study of economics and the decisions about market forces. So using economic insights. Theories tie together economic terminology and knowledge about economic institutions. So those are going to be our theories about what will happen. Theories are too abstract to apply to specific cases, are often embodied in economic models and principles. So oftentimes when we think about economics, once again, we can't always bring something into the laboratory. We have these theories that are going to happen. When we want to think about it more in terms of a specific item, then we're going to have to apply something that is more precise, such as a model. An economic model is a framework that places the generalized insight of a theory in a more specific contextual setting. So if we have a specific setting that we're trying to apply the general theory to, then we can create the model for it. We're going to try to restrict the idea to the assumptions of the model. And an economic principle is commonly held insight stated as a law or general assumption. So remember that the law may not be a whole true in all cases, but we think it's going to be a helpful principle in order to use as a guideline in our model, so that the model can be used to make predictions. And as long as the model is making a prediction about the world that is accurate or can be useful to us, then it's a good model. So using economic insights. Theories, models, and principles are continually tested to see if predictions of the model match the data. So notice when we think about these models, we're going to think about them logically, rationally. We're going to put the model together. We're going to make decisions on the model. Then hopefully we're going to test the data. And just like in the scientific method of anything else, we're going to test the data and see if the real world is in relation to the theory. Does the real world match the theory? Anything that we can test, of course, in a scientific way, we will. That's the scientific method. So we want to run the test. We want to say, hey, here's what we thought. Here's what we think is going to happen. Here's the data that came from it. Does it match what we think should have happened? So models lead to theorems, propositions that are logically true based on the assumptions. So when we make the models, we're going to make theorems on the models. That's why we made the model. And then we're going to arrive at policy precepts, policy rules that conclude that a particular course of action should be preferable. So we're applying the model to a practical area so that we can make assumptions and thereby make policies from those. And of course, we're going to make policies that are practical and achieving the goals that we're looking to achieve. So these theorems must be combined with knowledge of real-world economic institutions and value judgments to determine economic goals for society. So note that when we think about the models, we have to think about who are we making the models for? Where are we going to apply these models? Note that in general, we often have very similar types of goals overall, but we often will have different variations on which goals we think are more, we put more weight on, or our order of the goals that are most important could be different depending on who we're talking about, what types of groups we're talking about. We also need to think about, how could we implement something? When we think about economics in terms of a political area or in business, we could come up to this conclusion. This would be the course of action we could take, and then say, well, that's completely politically impossible to do, maybe, or these types of things could come up as well when we think about the policy. So when we think about it, we got to think about what are the values of the people we're putting this in place for, and is it possible to do within those types of contexts.